Welcome to Quarantine Creatives. I'm Heath Racela. So Rory Scovel is my guest today, and this is a fun one. Rory's a stand-up comedian. He's an actor. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you may have heard my interview a few weeks ago with Payman Benz. Payman's a comedy director, and Payman's done a lot of work for lots of shows, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Last Man on Earth. But if you listen to that interview, you heard us talk a lot about this new show that Payman had just done called Robbie. It's about a basketball coach in Georgia that is trying to get out of his dad's shadow, who is this kind of legendary basketball coach in town. So Robbie is actually a show that was developed and written and stars Rory Scovel, today's guest. And I was so thrilled to get to talk to him because I really, really enjoyed Robbie. I thought it was a really good show. And it's interesting, you know, Rory talks about it in the interview here, but it's a show that Comedy Central greenlit. They spent all this money to make a pilot. Then they said, yeah, give us 7 more. We love this show. And then, as often happens in the entertainment industry, people changed over. The mission of the channel changed. And all of a sudden, there were 8 episodes of this amazing show that Comedy Central didn't really feel like fit with their lineup anymore. So they decided to put it up on their YouTube channel just so that people could see it. And it's hanging out there now. So it's free. You can go watch it. It's a really funny show. It's a really quirky show. It's a cool show. Go check it out. Co-starring along with Rory Scovel, Beau Bridges plays his father, the basketball coach. I mean, Beau freaking Bridges. How cool is that? Mary Holland plays his girlfriend. And Sashir Zameda, I think she steals the show. She is incredible in this. Sashir plays the mother of Robbie's child, who he doesn't learn until I think the first or second episode that he even had a son. And all of a sudden, at 10 years old, he meets his son, and, well, you'll see what happens. But it's also a show that dives into a lot of issues that get associated with the South. They're not necessarily Southern issues, but they get kind of stereotyped as Southern issues. Race is a big one. There's a backdrop of race throughout the entire show that I found really interesting, especially sort of the times we're in right now with Black Lives Matter really being at the forefront of everybody's mind. And the other piece of it that's really prominent is religion. Rory's character, Robbie, coaches this church league basketball. It's for a Catholic church. There's a priest in the show. There are scenes set in the church a fair amount. And it's unclear, you know, Robbie doesn't come across as super churchy, I guess. I think it's revealed at one point he's not even baptized. So maybe he's not churchy at all. But it's also not, the church piece of it isn't a punchline. It's not making fun of religious people, much like the race stuff. It's just kind of there in the background. And that was fascinating to me. And it was fun to talk to Rory about some of these issues. And, you know, he and I have a very similar background in terms of growing up in very Catholic families and kind of drifting away from the church. And I talk about that with him in this interview. And since I talked to Rory, I've been thinking more about sort of the church and its relationship to my life, and just trying to think of what that moment was where I went from being somebody that didn't go to church with any regularity, but still basically considered myself a Catholic, to the point where I said, you know, I can't identify as this anymore. This isn't a part of my identity. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. I talked to Rory about sort of the church I grew up in and the surety of the teachers around me and the priests around me that they were 100% convinced, or at least this is what they projected to us, that everything they were telling us was the word of God, was the truth, and there was no room for interpretation or critical thinking or questioning. This is what the church was teaching you. This is what you needed to believe in order to be a Catholic. So that was a turnoff. But some of the stuff that I didn't share with Rory that I've thought about sort of afterwards, one is, of course, being in Boston at the time when the church sex abuse crisis was breaking. That was very influential, and just sort of realizing initially it was, you know, 1 or 2 priests here or there. And then that story just continued to unravel over the course of a couple of months or maybe even a year or so, where you suddenly realize that this wasn't just 1 or 2 bad apples, so to speak, but that this was a systemic problem in the clergy. that there were many, 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 many priests for many years that were abusing young parishioners, and that this was well known, it was well documented, and it was kind of hidden under the rug. And that felt hypocritical to me. That felt like a dereliction of duty. And that definitely caused a big rift between me and the Catholic Church. But then in 2012, my wife and I took a trip to Italy, and I was really excited to go to the Vatican. And I was thinking, you know what? Like, maybe this will be the thing that restores my faith. Maybe just being at the center of the church and, seeing these beautiful altars and the Sistine Chapel, and, maybe that will alter my perception. And really quite the opposite happened. That when you go around, not just Rome, but we went to Florence and we went to Tuscany, and you realize that in some of these villages that are 1,000 years old, or, in Florence or in Rome, the church is the most beautiful building in town. It's the most prominent building. It is the most decadent building. And you realize sort of how people were living at that time, that there were peasants that were barely getting by on scraps of food and living in squalor. And here the clergy were building these temples to quote unquote God, but that they just happened to get to live in. And they were commissioning all this incredible artwork, Michelangelo, and, carving all this beautiful stonework and painting the Sistine Chapel. And then when you go through and actually tour the Vatican, and you just see the level of artwork and the amount of it, I mean, it's got to be billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of art in the Vatican. And you just say, wait a second, like, this doesn't feel like what I was taught. I feel like the good things that I took away from my church experience were loving your neighbor, the golden rule, treating others the way you want to be treated. And I couldn't look at these beautiful churches and not just see hypocrisy. And it's the same hypocrisy that I saw with the sex abuse crisis, but here it was stretching back 1,000 years or more. And to me, I saw that as all related. I saw that as one continuum, and it just didn't feel right anymore. And I felt like the best truth that was out there was looking for the good in each other, looking for the good in the nature around us, and not relying on what somebody else is telling you is the right thing, especially when they have a vested interest in that. And I don't know exactly how Rory found his spirituality, or, how that evolved, but he and I at least both grew up very Catholic and are both not very Catholic now, but that shadow still looms large, and you see it in Robbie. And it's interesting, and it was interesting to talk to him. So here is my interview with comedian Rory Scovel.
Sorry, I'm a few minutes late there. I went to do it from my computer, and when I do a call from the computer, it's not great. So then I quickly jumped in my car, and we don't have a good signal on our street. So I drove down the street.
So you're like sitting in a parking lot somewhere talking to me?
I pulled off on the side of the road, but I think I'm going to find a more neighborhood fun spot.
Okay.
But I think I should be good. If you can hear me good now, I'm going to sit right here, and this should be good.
Yeah, no, you sound great. So
okay, cool.
I feel like we're in just such weird times with this quarantine and stuff. Like, the idea of driving to find a cell signal doesn't seem like the craziest thing that's happening in the world right now. Like, how have you been spending the last 3 months? Just keeping busy, keeping creative, that kind of stuff.
Well, what's so interesting about being in the quarantine? I actually get a little bit of adrenaline by having to get into my car to go find a. So if it's like, ooh, something to go and do. I used to, my grandparents, who have since passed away, but when they lived in Florida and I would go visit them, my grandfather would willingly go to the grocery store many times a day for any reason to go grab anything. I always would give them a hard time and make fun of them. It's only now that I kind of can understand why that was actually fun to do.
Right. It's something. It gets you out of the house.
It's something to get you out of the house, and you're just kind of like, oh yeah, you get in the car, you just go out for a second. Who cares? That's you hit a certain age, that's kind of entertainment.
Right.
And I guess getting in my car to make a phone call is now my entertainment.
That's it's the thing. It's something. Have you gotten like car sick at all driving like I've noticed that like if I go over like 50 miles an hour, just because I don't do it that often, like I'll do it like once every 2 weeks and be like, whoa, I'm not used to driving.
It does. It is. Yeah, I know what you mean. You get out of the rhythm of the things that you used to do, that your mind and body became so accustomed to, that you stop noticing that you were even doing it or how you felt about it,
Right.
including traffic. Like even when you sat in traffic, you'd still get aggravated, but it was never anything new. You just went into autopilot in your brain to
Yeah.
get through it. Yeah, that hasn't happened so much because we really have not driven many places. We went out to Joshua Tree one weekend
Nice.
to just get away, and that just also felt, so safe. It's so spread out. I think they've
Right.
had like 3 cases or something. Who even knows? But yeah, we went out there, and the drive there, I got to say, it did feel kind of strange to be in the car for an extended period of time when since March we've maybe been in the car for 10 minutes max at any
Right.
given moment for a pickup or something.
Yeah, it's a whole new reality. How you've got a daughter too, right?
Yeah, she daughter turns 5 in about a month, less
Okay.
than a month.
Yeah, I got a
Yeah.
4-year-old and 7-year-old, so it's
Okay.
you got your
Well,
hands full, right?
I'll tell you what, for them to have each other and also at those ages, or actually that might be the ideal age situation for them playing together and kind of distracting each other. Have you
It's
found that to be the case?
It definitely helps. Yeah, and my oldest, she's 7, like she's not at the point yet where she misses her friends, I think. Like she was in first grade this year, and it's
Okay.
still kind of a new thing to like, having play dates or being in school. Like I think if she were like, a fifth grader or middle schooler, she'd be like,
Sure.
where are my friends? Why am I stuck with you guys all the time? But this has kind of
Yeah.
been, the last 6 years of her life.
At around like 11 or 12, that suddenly they don't want to socialize with their parents anymore. That
Yeah.
sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not at that point yet, fortunately. But
Oh, thank God. Pandemic or not, it's going to be heartbreaking.
I know. It's coming though. It's fast.
Right.
So prior to all that, like, were you doing stand up and stuff right until stuff started shutting down? Like, do you remember kind of your last show before everything changed?
I do because I was on a tour following the band Tool around
Oh,
with
cool.
another comic, Nick Youssef, and we had done it before in January, and the band had found out about it, and so they had given us these all access passes for their whole tour to just get into the shows for free and watch the shows and hang out with the guitarist Adam. And so me and Nick Youssef were on the second leg of that tour, following them up around Boise and Spokane and Portland.
Yeah.
And our last show, I think, was Tuesday, March 10th at Mississippi Studios in Portland, Oregon. We were still doing meet and greets and selling merch at the
Oh,
merch
wow.
table after the show. And it was kind of interesting because that was still a point where we, the public, as you remember, still weren't being informed as to what to expect or what was currently happening. You kind of still were like, oh yeah, that thing that's happening in China,
Right.
I hope they get it together. But you, like all things, we just think that, well, technology and where we're at, it'll just get fixed and it's not really a thing. So I think we were all joking and we were fist bumping and using hand sanitizer after each person kind of came to the table, being like, oh yeah, we're doing, they said, all they said to do is wash your hands.
Right.
So we're washing our hands. And then the next day we went to the Tool concert, and I got to say, I felt so strange being in that venue. It was beautiful to watch the show. We watched the show from the soundboard, front of house, to watch the show, which, by the way, if you ever get an experience to watch a concert from the front of house, right next to the soundboard and the lighting, it's truly the most amazing spot
Yeah.
to be standing.
Well, they need the
It was
best view, right? Because they need to see what's going on. So it's
best
open
view,
and
and also they've made it so that they're capturing the sound so that they can tweak it. And I've just never, that was my first time, kind of hearing about that, and then getting to do it was spectacular. But there was a part of me that felt somewhat like, oh, at least I'm on this platform in this roped off area watching this concert. But I could already feel it in my soul that I was like, someone here has it and they're
mm,
just breathing and we're breathing, and it's going to be out there. And I just had this suspicion. And then the very next day, Nick Youssef and I'm just going to say Nick. I don't know why I keep saying his full name, but Nick and I drove from Portland to Boise, and he decided to turn on the Joe Rogan podcast where he talked to the CDC guy from Minneapolis or Minnesota. I don't know if it was specifically Minneapolis. And that guy, in a 2-hour discussion, laid out how severe things were about to be and his prediction that 400,000 people would die. And it was only then that I looked at Nick and I was kind of like, I think we should just drive home right now, because I think the wave is about to really crash. And I don't know that we all are aware of it because no one's really talking about it or saying what it is. That was my first time really going, oh, wow, this is way more and bigger than I thought.
Yeah. And then there were kind of the big cancellation, the NBA called off the season and some of those big high profile things that you're like, oh, well, this is real.
I wish that there was Colin Hanks was going to do a documentary about me and Nick following Tool around. And had he been doing that, he would have gotten footage of us, in the dressing room with Adam while Adam's being informed that some of the concerts have to be canceled because of the no more than 200 people rule.
Right.
And so we were witness to that and being like, oh, that's crazy. That's like so much money, and that's such a what a hassle. We were thinking what a hassle. We weren't thinking, yeah, of course you need to cancel. We were just like, oh, that sucks. And then Nick and I got to Boise. We went to dinner with Adam and some of the crew from the concert. And then the next morning, got a text from Adam that the rest of the tour was canceled and they were all going to be flying home. And so me and Nick canceled our show that night. And I bought him and I a flight, the very next flight out. We grabbed our stuff, drove as fast as we could to the rental car place and got on the very next flight to just get back to LA. And it's still so surreal. It feels like I left that life. I feel like there is a part of my life that is still in Boise on pause. And I still with such naivete believe that I will go back and meet that person just sitting in Boise waiting to finish that.
Yeah, it is wild. And so Colin Hanks was doing this documentary on you. Like, was he around when he got word that his parents had contracted it? Like, what was? So
he did not end up doing the documentary. He was going to. He was interested, and if he had done it, it would have been a very interesting. He would have never gotten enough material to formulate it, but on camera, he would have gotten a major band finding out how insane this news is, that things are getting canceled and all this. But yeah, that was the night that it kind of got publicized that his parents had it, and being in Australia, and even still, I was like, oh, well, now I guess it's in Australia. I still wasn't going, oh, it's for sure in America. Right. It's for sure happening. And that was so surreal. It's also still so surreal that they recovered and just came back to America.
Tom Hanks was hosting SNL, a month later.
Yeah. And I guess you're kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess you get sick and then you just go back to your normal life. And because, at that point, people were like, if you're really old, it'll probably, there's grave consequences, and if you're really young, and you hear that with like the flu and stuff, and so it isn't like that's a new phrase you've ever heard, that it's logical that elderly people or the really young would have the weakest immune systems just by nature. So I don't even think hearing that information was enough to really wake people up. You can tell now that information has actually been unfortunate for some people's perception of the severity of this thing, that they still just think this is a sickness that old people get. Yeah.
It's kind of swung the other way in these last couple of weeks.
It's swung the other way from so many things, reopening and unfortunately, and this is where my heart and soul is at a torn loss, is that also with the protests that are such an essential part of the evolution of our society to become a better country and a better planet. Even that, you have to look at it and go, well, for sure, that's going to lead to some more cases, unfortunately. And a lot of those people, you just don't know how much it's spread. It's so strange that a part of me is like, well, fighting for justice is one reason to contract it that I could personally live with. I don't know that I could live with contracting it because I just had to be inside of a Pizza Hut.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, that, like, the idea that people are so eager to get out and, yeah, like eating a Pizza Hut or an Olive Garden, I'm like, is that really
Yeah.
worth it? Like,
And I hate it. It is a conundrum, and I know that that word is not even enough to describe it. It's almost
yeah,
comical to use the word conundrum, but it is a complex equation of, well, how do you try to, salvage what you can of the economy while also caring about people's health? And I believe in my soul it actually is very possible and could have been done simply by communicating the fact that in a world where we may never have a vaccine, you can still win the game by wearing masks and
right.
washing your hands, and socially distancing. And I think that the fact that that wasn't communicated early on, that there is another way to win, caused all this. And now with the reopening, it's almost like, what was even the point of the first 100 days of quarantine? It's all like, it's almost all for nothing. We
Yeah.
got on top of it and then we just gave it all away. We gave away the lead. We had the lead.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And yeah, just that I feel like enough people, for whatever reason, that message hasn't sunk in that the mask is less for you than the people around you. Like it's not going to stop you from
Yes.
getting sick necessarily, but the hope
Yeah.
is that you might be stopped from spreading. I feel like not enough people are getting that, and they're walking around without a mask saying, well, if I get sick, fuck it, whatever.
Yeah, which is it truly so crazy to me, and it's a lesson. It's a huge lesson for people to comprehend the spread of information and how dangerous opinionated news, and I mean that on both sides. I feel like anyone with any even the slightest bit of intellect comes to a point where you realize both sides are playing a game of manipulation and misinformation, and you realize it's detrimental. It's truly unfortunate because it's created this divide right now on who believes what the masks do and who thinks the masks are crazy. I mean, as I just told you, I started taking this seriously after listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, who has now said the masks are meaningless
Right.
to a massive amount of people who really truly believe him. And I don't know anything about science, but I'd like to think I'm smart enough to know that if you and I are outside and we are 6 feet apart and you have on a mask and I have on a mask, I would bet every dollar I've ever made in my life that neither of us could contract it. Or if one of us had it, both of us would not walk away with it.
Yeah.
You would be as protected as you could possibly be in a world without a vaccine.
Yeah. I think that's the best we can do right now, and just take that simple level of protection. I want to ask you just sort of about growing up, and you're from Greenville, South Carolina, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I have friends there actually. We went there maybe a year ago and visited them, and like so I've been through there a little bit. I don't know it well, but I've spent 3 or 4 days there. How did growing up in Greenville sort of shape your perspective, your worldview, your comedic voice?
I think that coming from I couldn't say that these are. Yeah, well, I guess I could. I think that growing up in a conservative, very religious, Bible Belt Southern place, and I always hate describing it that way because I think some people think that's all they picture.
Right.
When really Greenville is it is progressive. It might not be the most progressive, but it isn't sometimes what people picture of the South.
Yeah, and relative to the areas around it, it's very progressive. I mean, it's right. It's a city, and there's a school there, and
absolutely. I think that being surrounded by that means that you are surrounded by specific people, and I think this is something I probably could have gained perspective wise in my comedy from maybe anywhere. The older I get, I realize that, but I gained this sense of hypocrisy on what people committed their lives to believing in terms of religion, and then how they behaved, what their actions actually were. I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten through 8th grade, and I went to an Episcopalian high school for 3 years. I failed 10th grade English, so I repeated by 1 point. I repeated 10th grade. So I went to high school for 5 years, and I went to public school for the final 2 years of those 5 years. And so I gained a lot of perspective on, going to private school. You can imagine you're not going to see economic hardships that other families might face,
Sure.
I probably had the least amount of money. I probably came from the least amount of money at the private schools that I went to. And then I went to a public school where I suddenly felt like I might actually be rich and I don't know it. And that was eye-opening for me to realize that it's actually somewhat difficult for you to distinguish where you are in your life financially. And it also opened my eyes to the fact that your perception of yourself is sometimes just defined by what you're around. It might not actually be accurate. You're just comparing yourself to what you have to compare yourself to. But comparing yourself in another setting, in another society, you might find that you're actually different than you even thought of yourself. And I think religion wise, I kind of learned that. I think from somewhat of a young age, I never felt as though what I was being taught as a Catholic, I had a hard time accepting that was reality and that was the rules of history, that if you do these things and you are this type of person,
right,
this is what happens when you die. And strangely, to bring it back around to what we were talking about before, a band like Tool kind of opened my mind up to realize it's okay to not know what happens when we die, or to not know what is the point of being alive, or any of that. And I think coming from a society of, a lot of religion, definitely racial tension that was merely, it might have progressed and gotten better, but it definitely was by no means, as we still know across the country, not great.
Yeah.
But in the South, it's a part of the identity. And you don't know that. I didn't know till I moved to DC that, some of the things I joked about or said were actually wildly inappropriate and hurtful, not just in race, but stuff that, the statements that I would make that I now understand are homophobic. You grow up in a church where people say, well, no, if you're gay, that's wrong. And as a kid, oh yeah, okay, well, if you're an adult, why would I not believe you? Okay. Right. Oh, okay, so gay people are ... Got it. And then you have to grow up and learn through experience that makes no sense. Someone just taught you that and you thought that was your reality. I think a lot of my comedy comes from the fact that I'm so frustrated by that misinformation, that molded a version of me that is not who I actually am. And had I not moved away, and I can't say this because obviously I did move away. I can't say this with any certainty, but had I not moved away, would I still be someone who believed those things?
Yeah, that's interesting. I identify with a lot of that, actually. I grew up in Ohio, but raised in a very Catholic family. My grandparents, especially on both sides, were both very, very Catholic. Prayed the rosary very religiously and things. And, the part for me that was always challenging was like, the teachers were just so sure of themselves. Like I would say, they would say, this is the word of God, and we believe that this is what Jesus spoke, and this is the truth, and only Catholicism is the truth. And I'd say, well, but don't you think, like, Jewish people feel just as strongly about their faith, or Buddhist people, or, whatever? Like, how can you be so sure that your way is the right way? And they're just like, well, I just know. And I'm like, but how do you know? Like, I feel like if somebody had just said, I'm not sure, but this really feels right to me, I would have been okay with it. But like, just that, like, no, this is right. You got to trust us.
I now believe that just admitting that you don't know is the most honest thing you can do. And I sometimes wonder if there is some God out there in the way that people sometimes envision God to be because of their religion. Is that the ultimate test? That God really just wants you to admit that you don't know what the fuck is happening.
Right.
And if you just admit that, God's like, good, that's all I need you to drop your ego and just admit that you are floating around, and you may never, ever, ever get the answers to any of these questions, but just say, I don't know. I really don't know. I have no clue.
Yeah, and just to be open to some of the, like you said, just the homophobia and things like that. Or I remember, like, they were trying to recruit us at like age 10 to go like to these anti-abortion rallies and stuff. And I didn't even know what abortion was. I'm just like, oh, that sounds fun. Yeah, it's a church thing. We're going to hang out. And my mom just very subtly was like, no, we're not going to that. But like feeling like, oh yeah, that's kind of where I belong. That's my people are over there doing that thing. I don't know what it means, but yeah. 10 years old, anti-abortion? Sure, that sounds great.
Well, you got to also think like, at 10 years old, you probably were like, well, what is an abortion? And someone goes, well, they kill babies.
Yeah.
And there is no human being in the world who doesn't hear they kill babies and immediately go, oh my God,
Yeah.
what?
I don't want to be for that. Yeah.
Because you're also, no one's telling you, they're just saying kill babies. So
Right.
picturing killing babies, you're like, well, that is crazy. No one breaks down specifically in the scientific terms and what truly is happening in an abortion and telling you the other side of what it actually is. Because and the reason why is because they go, well, he's only 10, and then you want to be like, why are you involving him at all?
Right.
If you can't really tell him what it is, why are you asking him to be a part of it?
Yeah, it's all just so strange. But I want to talk too just about Robbie, the show you did for Comedy Central, and I don't know if you know, I talked to Payman Benz like a week ago, and he, so I got to see the show just in talking to him, and then we were going to talk. I'm like, yeah, cool. I had seen all the episodes at that point, but there is there's a lot of religion in that show. Just, it's you play a church basketball league coach, and, there's a priest in it. There's scenes happening in confessionals and like in the church. I guess why, coming off of this religious conversation, why so much religious symbolism in Robbie?
I think for me, what I kind of the world that I wanted to put Robbie in, and who Robbie is kind of the discussion we just have about the awakening of what you grow up in and all these things. And I think the only way you can explain that or show that or have people that you really want to get the message relate to it, you have to put the character in that setting. And so I kind of wanted to be like, well, how do we make a show that's kind of close to my own experience in my life, but is not really about me, but has those ingredients of, if someone were like, all right, we're going to tell the Rory Scovel life story, these are things that would definitely be a part of it. So I wanted basketball for sure, because my family is a very big basketball family, and religion for sure, because that's such a part of being in the South and a part of the family I grew up in. And then having sort of dad related issues, I feel like I relate heavily to that in my own interpretation of what my relationship with my dad might be. And also I feel like that's probably relatable to every man and woman out there. Everyone's got something in their mind about their dad specifically. It's both moms and dads, but dads is like another puzzle to try to put together. And then having a kid, my daughter was born in 2015, and I was kind of like, I don't want to tell the story of an infant. I kind of want to tell the story of a new dad from a different perspective and in a different way. So I think it was kind of trying to be autobiographical without being autobiographical, I guess.
Yeah. And it's not in a mocking way either. I mean, as you say, just sort of getting people to think differently. Like the church isn't the punchline. It's just kind of a background.
Yeah, we didn't want to, myself and everybody involved in the show, all of the creators and writers and producers, we never wanted to punch down. I'm from the South, and I have a lot of pride about the South. I really love the South. And I think what aggravates me is anyone in the South that actually, perpetuates the image of the South that people have. Sometimes you get into a conversation and you say the South, people are immediately thinking racism. And while that's historically valid, I just kind of want to be like, that's not the whole thing. That's not the whole place. That's not the whole history. And that's not the whole present day feeling of it. And so I wanted to really showcase that in a way. I wanted to have race be a part of the show, but race that we don't talk about. I wanted to show people a normal world where people live in diverse social circles and they don't feel the need to talk about it all the time, because I'd like society get to a place where it isn't special or unique that people of different races all mesh together and just exist in one kind of society.
Yeah, it's interesting too, just sort of that backdrop of race, and sort of in the same way that religion plays into the show, that there are these kind of moments that like the ice cream parlor that Robbie works at, it turns out was founded by the Klan, or
That's right.
his son is looking at schools and it's on a former plantation. Like just sort of balancing that, where I think about too, there's that line, Sashir Zameda plays the mother of your child, and you guys have this interracial son, and at one point she's hanging out with all the other white parents, and they're kind of laughing with her, and they say, oh, you're like the black Ellen, and she goes, well, you can just say Ellen. Like
Exactly. Yes.
it's a small moment, but it's just kind of always there in the background too, the sort of racial tension.
Yeah. Yes. And we had said that too. I was like, and there's no, from the jokes of wanting to have things that are edgier, like if you are going to make race jokes or religious jokes, we for sure never wanted them to be offensive humor at all. I just don't, and people do that, whatever, it's fine. People enjoy it, whatever. It just isn't, it doesn't match myself and the other people working on the show. But we definitely wanted to have statements, and we definitely wanted to like slide stuff in there that maybe people would, maybe see that specific moment you're talking about. Maybe someone watches that and they go, oh yeah, that's right. Why do I also perceive it that way?
Right.
Why don't I also just go, oh yeah, you can just say Ellen. So it's almost like, well, how do we write a joke, but then maybe somebody walks away from that joke going, oh, that's actually a good point.
Yeah, no, and I think you handled that well. I'm really curious too, just sort of the writing process on that show. Like you got greenlit for a pilot before it was picked up for a series, right? And then there was like
Yes.
7 more after that, and then there's kind of the question of if there's a season 2 or not. Just sort of writing in sort of a start and stop fashion like that, not knowing how long you're going to have to tell an arc. Like what are the challenges in that, and how do you leave it open ended so that if it ends today, everyone's satisfied, but if it gets picked up, there's room for more?
Yeah, it's very tough. It's very tough to do, and it's also unfortunate to like have to do it. You kind of wish, I really wish American television was more this maybe fewer episodes, more like the British, where it's like fewer episodes, but then you kind of have a guarantee of 2 or 3 seasons, because then I think you can really tell a story that brings closure to the audience and to the characters. In this particular case, our show was going to be way more serialized. That was our intention, was to really tell stories where every episode sort of had a cliffhanger. And Comedy Central really was like, it needs to not be serialized. And they do have a point that if someone were to just jump in on episode 4, there's a good chance, given the fact that this is not a streaming show,
Right.
At least at the time, it wasn't going to be on YouTube. It was going to be on TV. There's a good chance they wouldn't be able to catch up with 1, 2, and 3, by going to the Comedy Central app and trying to figure out how to see the other shows to catch up with the story.
Right.
Very difficult. So we had to rethink how were these episodes going to be standalone. And then on top of it, Comedy Central really wanted to have a cliffhanger at the end of the first season, which is also very difficult to do, knowing that you aren't telling this sort of serialized story. And I got to say, I give all of the credit to Anthony King and all of the writers that we had in the writers' room, because they really, worked with that note and were able to keep the episodes standalone, and then still kind of have Robbie have this overarching storyline throughout the whole season, where he does kind of become a better person, and he does kind of have an awakening, and then it ends with him either learning that lesson and who knows what he's going off to, but also it really sets us up nicely for a season 2 to get away from basketball perhaps and have him to explore some other part of his life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious sort of with that cliffhanger where it's going to go, after this, because it will, even just that transition from, he works in this one ice cream parlor for the first 4 or 5 episodes, and then that gets shut down and he ends up in this kind of higher end ice cream place with the same, it's the same woman he's worked with the whole time. Like that transition happened so smoothly over the course of, an 8 episode arc was kind of like, oh yeah, I could see these characters feel real enough and have an interesting enough backstory that you can move them into a bunch of different scenarios and not feel like, wait, how did they get here? They're not doing basketball anymore. What's happening? there's a lot of richness to it. It's written really
I
well.
think that's what we were looking for, was to try to figure out how do you kind of follow that Always Sunny in Philadelphia model of solidifying these characters so that then episode to episode you can interchange the characters to be like, well, who's going on the A story adventure together and who's going to be the B story adventure, and make it so that all of the characters make sense collaborating with each other, so that anyone watching might be like, oh, it's going to be Ava and Coach. For instance, that's where in episode 6, I think it is, we really tried to branch out and be like, okay, so this storyline, it's just Coach and Ava. We need to start separating everybody from Robbie. Robbie does not need to be the center of everybody's universe that informs their decisions. We need to get away from him so that their lives are enough. So we were like, well, let's give ourselves 5 episodes to really solidify that. And then starting with episode 6, let's really start to make the show where Robbie is not the sun. He's just also one of the planets. And that's really our intention for season 2, was like, all right, now we've established all the characters and their relationships, and we've established this world that we kind of know of because of Robbie. Now let's really get to know them individually. There is a chance, we don't get a season 2 and we don't ever get to do that, which I think is unfortunate, because we really set it up to make season 2 even better than season 1, which I already really like as a season.
Yeah. And do you have a sense yet of sort of, just with everything shut down, like when a decision will be made about being greenlit, and even when production could return, or when you'd be comfortable with it returning?
We know that it won't be at Comedy Central. They are going unscripted. So our situation with this particular show is to get as many eyes on it as possible and try to get as much positive feedback and get, people to write reviews and really promote it, because Comedy Central also isn't putting any advertising money into it. So it's really this, unfortunately, it's this show that was born at a time when Comedy Central decided to rebrand. And here we've made this decent show that so many people will maybe never know about, that I think is actually entertaining and good. And even if we never got to make a season 2, I'd love it for a lot of eyes to get on it. But yeah, it'll really take a place wanting to buy it and make more episodes.
Yeah. It's so weird too, just like the reality of TV now, that like there used to be a TV season in the fall, and a handful of networks that would pick up a show. And there's the possibility, I suppose, that, 2 years down the road, a Hulu or a Netflix or somebody could say, what was that Rory Scovel thing? Let's start that up again. Like it's just such a weird reality we live in now. I want to ask one last thing, just sort of on your stand-up and sort of going off the writing process. Like when I watch your comedy, so much of it is kind of based on taking these detours and these kind of non sequiturs that turn into something, and they often feel improvised or sort of played off the crowd. Like when you do a set, how written is your set, and how much are you improvising, or how open are you to improvising when you're up on stage?
I'm super open to it, because those are my favorite moments in any show. I love also, I mean, there is a similar joy in not knowing what is about to happen and trying to figure it out and make it fun. And then there's also just as an equal amount of fun for a performer to have a joke that they know crushes, and you can give it to the crowd. It's so fun to perform and add to it and build on it. I believe in my own trying to step outside of myself and look back. I think that a lot of the moments in my show appear to be improvised because most of my jokes are born out of improvisation. Yeah. And I think because that's how it's born, I kind of continually perform it kind of the way that I discovered it. And so it kind of, I think it appears almost like an unintentional magic trick. It just kind of makes it look more mysterious and impromptu than it is. But because I also perform where I'm very open to improv in the moment, someone would see a show where I am definitely improvising. And I think that masks it even more. Not that that's my goal. I don't really care if someone knows that I've pre-written everything or not. But I think that's why it gives that illusion unintentionally, because I don't really sit down and write out jokes. I sometimes will. I'll get into a rant and I'll sit and I'll write a whole paragraph and then I'll go on stage and work on it. But I do more of my writing on stage.
Yeah. And it feels like so much of your comedy is kind of based on little things, you know, in your special for Netflix, just sort of the business you do with the members only jacket. Like that just becomes a whole thing that, like, you know, there's not a lot of, hey, did you ever notice, or what's the deal with, like, it's it's performative and fun, and it feels like you're just kind of bouncing off the audience and picking up on their energy and kind of swerving based on that in the moment. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. I think a lot of that comes from having learned improv, right? You know, taking improv classes right as I started to do open mics back in DC in 2004. I was doing those things at the same time. So naturally they each kind of informed the other. And then it's a matter of discovering comedians like Todd Glass and Brody Stevens and someone like Andy Kindler. I could name Eddie Pepitone. I could name so many comics that Maria Bamford easily. So many comics that they go on stage and it just isn't the same kind of music that a lot of times becomes mainstream in stand-up, where it is this sort of setup punchline, which is fine and good and obviously successful for a reason. You know, Todd Glass goes on stage and is just a hurricane of crazy, weird, silly, funny.
Yeah.
And when you see that for the first time, you realize, well, I guess that really is what I paid for. I did pay to come in here and laugh. So whenever people critique comedy, I find it fascinating because that's an interesting thing to critique. But to me, it's as simple as, well, it's either funny or it's not funny. Anything else outside of that is just sort of a meaningless breakdown of what what I'm watching. If someone tells me it's funny, I go, great. If someone says it's not, you know, then maybe I'll check it out. If someone says it's not funny, I'm almost more inclined to check it out because it's so subjective. You know what I mean? I go, oh, you don't think it's funny? I bet I find it very funny.
Let me see what I can find in that. Yeah. There was a bit, I think I read in an interview where you said something like you're comfortable if only like 20% of the audience at any given point is laughing, and that 20% is going to shift throughout the show too, right? Like you're not trying to kill the room with every single joke.
You know, it is fun to do that, but I see comics go on stage. Ted Alexandro is a comic that I've had to follow. And not that I want to, and I hope to never ever follow him again. He can crush every joke like it is his closing joke. He is a master at it, and he is so paced, and it's beautiful. It's like just watching this beautiful art happen in front of you.
Yeah.
And when you see someone like that, you go, oh fuck, I wish I could do that. But sometimes you have to accept that that's just not what you do. And it isn't like, well, if I really work hard, maybe I'll be able to perform like Ted Alexandro. That's not true. I mean, I could paint every single day of my life. It doesn't mean I'll ever be able to paint like so-and-so.
Right.
So you have to figure out, well, what is the thing that you do? What is the thing that you bring to the table? And I think at a certain point, I just had to accept that. I was just like, well, what makes me laugh? And if that makes the whole room laugh, well, that's awesome. But there are jokes specifically in my act that, you know, maybe 10 people laugh at. And I like knowing where I would never not tell that joke because it doesn't kill. I always tell it because to me, it's more like a radar of who are the 10 people in this room that are really on the same page as me.
Right.
And then with this next joke, if 50 people laugh, okay, those people are sort of on the same page with me. And then if I tell a joke that everybody laughs at, I would be like, okay, so this joke is maybe more for everybody. But if I got to be honest, I really love those 10 people the most.
Right. Well, they're on the same wavelength as you, so why not?
That right there is why my show, Robbie, is on YouTube.
Well, I hope more people see it because it is on YouTube. It's streaming. It's free. And there's 8 episodes. And yeah, I watched them all. I think they're great. And I hope somebody picks it up, you know? because it would be a shame to end it like this.
I agree, and who knows what production world will look like in this world of COVID and everything. But yeah, I hope we at least get a chance to make a second season, because I really believe that we could then cement 3 more seasons after people saw that second season and it was out there. I really think we'd have that if this were, advertised. So
yeah.
You talking about it and even wanting to talk about it is a huge benefit to me and the show. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, no, of course. And it's a show too that like that first season is solid. Like you watch so many Parks and Recreation's a good example. Like it takes a good solid, 10, 12 episodes before the show really finds its footing. And like Robbie, totally. I feel like it's just it's firing on all cylinders, right out of the gate, and just
Yeah.
I think
our goal is knowing that we wouldn't fully know what this show is, but let's still try to be as funny as possible and really tell good stories and have heart, even knowing that maybe we're not necessarily making the show we all pictured. And then I think because that was our kind of motive, I think that's what helped us discover the show, where we're like, oh, well, just following those 3 things kind of helped us find out that, oh, we are making the show that we want to make.
Yeah.
Whether it's the one you pictured or not, we found the one we want to make.
All right, Rory Scovel. That was good. Lots of stuff there. Go check out Robbie. It's on the Comedy Central YouTube channel. All 8 episodes are streaming for free right now. And you heard Rory there. Tell your friends, let them know if it's a show you like, because it's a great show, and it would be a shame to end it after 8 episodes. So hopefully people watch it. Hopefully someone picks it up, because I want to know what happens. I'm curious. And if you haven't had a chance yet, go listen to my interview with Payman Benz too, because Payman also cares a lot about that show, and we talk a lot more about Robbie in that episode. So go check it out. All right, new show on Monday. I am very excited for that one. I'm talking to Maren Hinkle, who plays Rose Weissman on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. That's Rachel Brosnahan's mother on the show, Tony Shalhoub's wife. And Maren is just such a wonderful, wonderful, sweet person. I had a really great talk with her. I'm so excited to share that with you guys. So I hope you'll come back on Monday and listen to Maren. It's a good one. Hey, and I know it's July 4th weekend. I know everybody wants to get away. I know it's a weird year to not have a little vacation, but do what you can just to stay sane, stay home. Don't go out and, crowd the beaches or pile into a pool party or whatever. Just stay with your family, stay safe. That's all we can do right now, right? All right. I am at Heath Racela on Twitter and Instagram. Leave me a note. Let me know what you think. Leave a rating, leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts. Have a great long weekend. Enjoy the 4th. I'll see you Monday. Stay safe.